great institutions like universities can long survive without change. The questions we have are just how rapidly the change occurs and how we as leaders of universities bring our colleagues along with the need for this change. And in fact, I think as the wonderful presentation from Hong Kong shows, that forming this is a question of continuous improvement. How can we do better for our students and for society each year is a key to doing this. Well, let me give you a few points and point out how remarkably similar the experience so far in Hong Kong, a 100-year-old institution in a former British colony, now part of China, and Skolkovo in Moscow, a 1-year-old institution are. At Cambridge, they have this marvelous expression, Cambridge, UK, we are a self-governing body of scholars. But this does not imply that it should be a self-referential body of scholars. We have to think about universities in the context of the society in which they work, and very critically, we have to identify and listen carefully to our stakeholders. So the marvelous slide in the presentation about what the stakeholders of the Chinese university in Hong Kong want of it, of their graduates, is an excellent example of quantitative analysis of what stakeholders seek in a university. We've done a very similar thing at Skolkovo in this last year. We've identified the main stakeholder groups in Russia and internationally for our new university and very deeply probed them to find out what it is they expected of our graduates, of our research projects. And remarkably, the list sounds very much like in Hong Kong. That there should always be a basis of knowledge, that the way of thinking, particularly about new problems, and the values you hold are very important, that you should be able to collaborate extensively, and interestingly for Skolkovo, that our students and our professors should be instruments of change and transformation. You know, this is the motivation for our university in some senses, and that they should be leaders, and particularly of the innovation process. So I think it's very important, having listened to stakeholders, and this is easier, I would say, for a narrow university, one that is in, for example, in my area in science and engineering, or one that's in economics, than a broad university like Hong Kong, to really develop a strategy of what is it that's going to make your university excel, that you can engage your faculty members and you can engage your stakeholders around. Well, for Skolkovo, this is fairly obvious. It's the innovation agenda. It's the agenda of this meeting. You know, I have this marvelous intellectual challenge of trying to define how a university that fundamentally would be designed as instrument of economic growth should be developed and structured. Now, how do you actually develop such a thing? I think that there's the most important tool we have in universities is benchmarking. And I think we generally underutilize this tool. I don't think it's so important to look at the ratings of university X, Y, or Z. I think it's important to go to university X, Y, and Z and learn how they actually do it, right? This is a well-established practice in business, and I think universities can make much more value of it. And in particular, it's important to understand not only the surface structures, but the actual underlying methodology and functionality when one benchmarks university. This is an incredibly powerful way to learn, and it's an incredibly powerful way for rectors to convince their faculty. You know, when I used to work at MIT, I had a very simple expression. If I want to get people's attention, I start the sentence by saying, at Stanford, and everybody in the room was listening to me. Right? That universities know who their peers are, and they can learn from their peers, and they can use peer comparison as a way to motivate change at the universities. The last point I would say is I think the great universities of the world and the important universities of the world have this direction, this sense of mission, this understanding of place, And they follow this inner guidance, guided by their stakeholders and guided by their benchmarking of other colleagues, and they don't look so much at the ratings. I think that leadership is about establishing new models. And this, in some senses, is what I think the universities selected here on the panel today are about. My university is now a year old, and it's gone from no faculty members to 15 wonderful international faculty members by the end of the year. We had no students, and now we have 20 students who, by the way, are benchmarking for us. Our 20 students are spending this year at MIT, at Imperial College London, at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and at ETH Zurich, learning about how innovation is taught from the perspective of a student, having 9 months to learn about this. And they'll come back and help us design our innovation education. We're creating new programs in IT and energy, which not only give technical fundamentals, but also give entrepreneurship and innovation training, but also give sectoral competence, sectoral knowledge, so the students will understand how to influence the IT sector, how to influence the energy sector. We've created our first 3 research centers with partnerships around the world. So it's these sense of direction that universities, great universities, have, and I think this Hong Kong example is a wonderful model.